So our reading from the Gospel of John begins by asking, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? We often think of forgiveness as being a response to some sin. And I'd like to share a little bit, some thoughts about forgiveness today in light of these passages. We think of sins in terms of particular actions that have some moral implications. So when I lied about my neighbor having an affair, I committed a sin. Of course, I really didn't lie about my neighbor having an affair. I just made that up. So is that also a sin? Or when I was a full-time pastor, if I had used my pastoral authority in a way to protect my position, even if it was hurtful to others, that could also be considered a sin. And so sin and forgiveness get related to actions, particularly ones that center on morality or on causing hurt. In the Gospel of John, however, we have a different notion of sin. It's not so much about moral actions as it is about our heart's orientation, our spirit's orientation. Am I open to the real presence of God, and am I willing to seek to live in that reality? Aaron was a friend of mine when I was a full-time pastor living and working in the upstate of South Carolina. She was also a minister working with a not-for-profit in the area. She had her own story to tell, a story of struggle with addictions before she got to where she was able to be. And in telling her story, Erin recalled being in a 12-step program, working toward her own recovery. And it's often the case that the people in addiction recovery uncover deep hurts in their lives. Some hurts they caused, some hurts they endured from others. There was one person in Erin's life that had left her with some very deep wounds. She was hurt, she was angry, she was harboring ideas of getting back at him somehow, sometime. Her mentor, her sponsor in the 12-step program, convinced Erin that it would be good for her if she would take time every day and pray for the person who had treated her so badly. She agreed that she would pray for him twice a day. At first, it was hard and awkward. How do you pray for the good of a person that you really kind of rather hate? Well, you start small. Dear God, may he live another day. Amen. Well, eventually, Erin found her prayers becoming a little bit more sincere and a little bit more kind. Dear God, may he have some blessing today. She began noticing a change in her own attitude about him. A couple weeks into this plan, her sponsor was talking with her again and asked Erin how it was going. And Erin admitted, well, I was doing fine for a while, but then I had to quit. I just couldn't keep going. You see, I couldn't keep praying for him. I found that the more I prayed for him, the more I was losing my anger at him, and I really wasn't ready to give it up yet. Another story. This is from Ira Byock, a physician and a writer. In his book, 4 Things That Matter Most, he includes stories of forgiveness as an essential part of finding peace in life before we die. Again, the book is called Four Things That Matter Most by Ira Byock. One story is of Jennifer and her mother, Mary. Their mother-daughter struggles were real. Jennifer remembers a difficult childhood, and she was now the primary caregiver for her mother. Mary, who was also facing progression of a relentless and terminal disease, also faced challenges with her thinking because of the way the disease was impacting her. Jennifer was caring for an 18-month-old son at the same time that she was taking care of her mother. Now, as her mother's abilities continued to decline, the two also engaged in some rather meaningful conversation. And it happened in bits and pieces as her mother was able, and it took quite a bit of time. So Jennifer recalls, Mom never apologized or said, I made mistakes and I'm sorry, please forgive me. Instead, she used the passive voice. There were mistakes, she said. I knew what she meant, though. And it took a lot of strength to relinquish her pride and pretense of motherly perfection and to acknowledge even that mistakes had been made. She was beginning to speak of her sorrow in her proud way and in perhaps the only way that she could find in her illness. Jennifer and Mary talked some about the way things had been when Jennifer was growing up. But Mary, her mother, also acknowledged her own difficult childhood in a cold, hard home full of work and fear. I know I passed things to you that my mother passed to me that were destructive, Mary stammered slowly. I don't have to be that way anymore. There is no longer time enough to be that way. And it's going to stop with him. And Mary pointed to her 18-month-old grandson who was playing on the floor, blissfully unaware of all that was going on. The bad stuff can stop, but the good stuff can be passed on. That's what I want us to do. Reviewing our reading from Ephesians, the opening words state, "For once you were darkness, but now in the Lord you are light. Live as children of light." Please notice, it does not read that you were living in darkness and now you are living in light. It reads, once you were darkness and now you are light. The difference is your spirit's orientation. You are now in the Lord, so you are light. So now live as children of light. The writer goes on to say that when things are brought into the light, that is, they are made visible, they also become light. Have you ever thought about the light of the moon? Yeah, the moon has no light of its own. Yet, on a night when the moon is full, there is enough brightness shining that I don't need a flashlight when I walk around the backyard without stumbling. The moon comes into the sun's light, and that light reflects off the moon so that the moon becomes light. When Mary brought into the light the abusiveness of her own childhood, that revelation then became a kind of light for her daughter Jennifer. Jennifer could see how her mother also had wounds that were deep and scabbed over. She began having compassion for her mother in a way that she had never experienced before. With love and honesty, Jennifer and Mary were becoming sources of light for each other. The reading from John is quite long, but it is also quite fascinating. It's one of the longest continuous readings that I have done in worship, and it's a wonderful back and forth story about a person that is identified as the man who was born blind. And he's often simply referred to as the man, as if he is standing in for all people of all time. Essentially, we are all blind from birth. It's only when we are able to recognize our blindness that we are able then to see. When we stubbornly insist that we can see and then continue in our blindness, it's as if we're saying, "Oh, I can see just fine. It's all of you who are blind." Did you see how the Pharisees were pressing the man? It's like an investigating committee calling witnesses. They call the man before them and they question him. Next, they call his parents. "Is that your son over there? Was he truly born blind? You can tell us." So how did he get his sight? I love the parents' rather political answer. Well, they knew what had happened, but it wasn't their story to tell. "He's of age, ask him." And so the Pharisees put the man back at the witness table. They're searching for something that could fit into their already formed ideas about life and about the world. They knew the answers that they wanted, and nobody was giving them. Finally, the man speaks such truth to them that they have no response that fits anymore. They have no choice to make. They can admit that what he is saying is true, and they can find some other way to continue in their ignorance and in their blindness. So what do? They attack the man's credibility. "You were born entirely in sin, and you are trying to teach us?" And then they had him thrown out. You know, it's amazing how powerful our biases can be. We know what is right, at least we think we do, and we find enough evidence to support our biased views. We find ways to discount or discredit views that oppose our notion of what is right, and we remain stuck in our ignorance, in our darkness. Erin realized that her prayers for the person who had hurt her so badly were beginning to change her, causing her to feel less anger, less hatred. And that did not fit with her idea of justice. Vengeance would be justice. And she remained imprisoned by her anger and her hatred. Eventually, though, Erin decided that she was tired of being caught in this dungeon. She brought her own hurts into the light, along with her anger and her desire for revenge, so she would resume praying for her perpetrator, and she found her way into good counseling, and she found the ability to forgive, and she was freed from the powers that had shackled her for so long. There is freedom that comes in forgiveness. Sometimes, like Jennifer and Mary, that daughter and mother, bringing to light one's own brokenness and hurt and hurtful ways, brings a freedom from the power of the past. In this family, a legacy of pain was being broken for the next generation. There is tremendous freedom and forgiveness. For Aaron, the healing of her addiction depended in part on her being able to forgive. The forgiveness on Aaron's part was not so much about letting the perpetrator of the pain off the hook. It was to free Aaron from continuing to be bound by the pain of the past, bringing it to the light, allowing the light of love, the light of Jesus, to shine upon her and transform her. As in the words of the song, longing for light, we wait in darkness. Longing for truth, we turn to you. Make us your own, your holy people, light for the world to see. Christ be our light.